Welcome back to the channel, everybody. My name's Matthew and we are building an All Aluminium AC Cobra. There's already a bunch of videos on how we got to this point so far, so we'll put a link to that playlist up top or down in the description. But for the last couple of weeks, I've been doing most of these panels on the front here, and I'm looking for a little bit of a change of pace. So today I'm going to do some welding. I'll go through and I'll show you guys how I fit the panels together, get them all nice and tight, get the best fit up and the easiest cleaning of the welds possible. So I'll flip you guys around and show you what we've done. So this is where we're at the moment. We've got, like I said, probably about 80% of the panels done for the car. And although they don't look like they fit too great at the moment, that's mostly just because they're all just overlapped and stacked on top of each other. So when we weld this whole clip together, what we've got to keep in mind is that we need to be able to remove it from the actual buck. So the last panels we're going to do, or not that we're going to do, the last panels we're going to weld in are going to be these ones here. And essentially what that does is it gives us the ability to remove it forwards. If we weld in these ones, it's sort of going to lock behind this flare here. So to start off with welding, I think we're going to start probably right here on these two panels. They're nice and flat, should be a relatively easy and quick weld to do. So first step, remove all the panels, get them off the buck, get the two that we want to fit up, get them to fit, and then I'll start showing you how we weld them together. All right, so we're going to start with these two panels for the welding. And as you can see, if I just put it on the back, she fits pretty mint. And the same for this panel as well. In its spot, she sits down quite nicely wherever it goes. There we go. Okay, but what we need to do first is, like this panel's got all its clicos, so it has an exact location where it fits. We just need to do the same thing with this one. It's just sort of held in place right now. So we'll just go through, clico it in place, make sure she fits, make sure there's enough overlap over all the sort of just little dotted lines. We've got all the material we need. Then what we're going to do is just clico both panels in place, overlapping each other. We'll just take a pen and mark the line so we can see exactly how much overlap we have to work with. And once we know that, then we can take some masking tape, mask out a nice straight line on whichever panel we're going with, cut that line, and then what we need to do is just put the panel back on top of the buck and just make sure. So once I've cut the first panel, then I'll just go through. So there's all these little shrink marks where I've just nipped up the edge of the panel. Now, once I cut those out, there's a good chance the panel will want to spring open again. So I might just need to go in and just nip the edge once it's trimmed, just to get the panel to fit nice and tight again. And then we'll just give it a quick file, make sure it's as flat as possible. And then we'll hook it over top of the extra material on the opposite panel, scribe the line, cut it, and we'll do the same thing. We'll put this panel in place, see if we need to nip the edge up, make sure that it's as close to the back as possible, and then we can start tacking the panels together. So I'm just going to put some clamps on this panel quick, make sure it's sitting in its spot, put some clicos in it, and then we can start. Cool. So there's not much to cutting the panel. I usually just cut it in strips, just so I don't pull it too skew while I'm cutting. What essentially is happening is you're sort of stretching it as you're cutting. So in between like cuts, it cuts cleanly, you stop, and then you start again. Just sort of like puts little stretches in there. So that's also something to consider. It's going to open up your panel a little bit. That's why I'll cut and leave just a little bit of material, so I can cut that sort of nice and cleanly, hopefully. So if you look down the edge, you'll see that there's a little wobble over there, and another one over there. So I'll just file those down.
Minute.
Here's the trick: you put a glove on, the file slips off the panel while you're busy. So if you want to cut your panel with, let's say, an angle grinder instead of shears, especially for aluminium work, if you use an angle grinder, it deposits sort of a bit of that material from the blade on the edge. So after you've cut your panel, you can then just use a file and file that edge away. And once your edge is clean, you know you've filed away any potential sort of impurities or stuff that'll gonna mess with your weld or anything like that. But for me, I find shears to be the easiest of my options. Cool, that edge is looking good. So we'll test it on the back and see if we need to nip it. Pop this one off first. Alright, so something else to consider. This really didn't pull too much. I might just give it a couple like little nips just on the edge. But it looks pretty good still. After you filed your panels, I don't break the edge of my panels. And that's because when it comes to TIG welding, what will often happen, especially if you just weld on one side, is that you'll sort of get like a monkey butt. I don't know what the actual term for that is, but that's what I call it. And that's essentially where, if you look on the inside, the penetration didn't make sort of one mound on the back, it made two little ones. And so that part of the aluminium isn't actually fused together properly. And that's my sort of tip and trick. I don't know if that works with all series of aluminums, but for 5,000, it works pretty well. Okay, I'm gonna go give this a couple shrinks. Yeah. Now I'm just trying to nip it really just on the edge of the panel. I don't want to go too deep with the jaws, because obviously there is shape here and these are flat jaws. And it's really just the edge of the panel that needs a little bit of work. And when it was on the back, I could see that the back was pretty close, and the front, where it curves around a bit more, that needed a little bit more shrink. So I'll space them out further apart at the back. I'll have them a little bit closer together, my shrinks towards the front. And the other reason is, if I can keep these shrinks just on the edge, and they really should just disappear when we weld over this. I'll just go this line over there. Yeah, let's see how that worked. Right.
Very much better.
Much better. There's a little bit there that needs to go as well. I'll do that quickly. We'll go back to you. All right, so if I put it in its spot again, there we go. You'll see that it is sitting a little high there. But the second I push down, and I don't even need to push down on the edge, I can just push down here. It pretty much goes away. So the shape is right now, it's just the arrangement. This corner is essentially just bent a little bit too far in. But usually that's not something I'd even bother about. The second I weld it to another panel, they'll hold each other exactly where they need to be. All right, so now that we're pretty happy with that one, we're going to do the same thing and fit this one up. Yo, cool. So I'm going to clamp this thing in place and make sure it is as tight as we can get it to the back. Just going to make sure that we're sitting nice and tight. Get one more clamp on there. And then, yeah, I'm just going to scribe it, take it off, cut the panel, and then I'll put this one back on, check that it fits nicely, and then weld it, tack it and weld it.
So a continuous checking of fitment is very important.
Yeah, the entire time. You can also check how well your panels flow now. Just make sure that you haven't got essentially like this edge touching and the whole centerpiece too high and stuff like that. So if the light looks nice and good, then you know you are pretty damn close.
Cool.
Good beans. Right. And what was? Yeah. I'm just going to do one final sanity check and just make sure. Okay. Cool beans. And we can take it off and cut it. So you can kind of see, if you don't clamp it nicely, we just hold it down in place, how much bigger the panel is. So you really need to make sure that they're sitting as tight as you can get it. So I'll pull this one off as well, cut it, fit it. I'll make sure this one fits 100%, and then we can put it together. Well, actually, then the next step is just making sure everything's as clean as possible, and then we can put it together and weld it. I'm sure By now these panels are all dusty and dirty and oily. Cool beans.
Maybe I'll tell them we're not using acetone. They're going to be crucified.
We're using degreaser, and that should be just as good.
Perfectly, so.
Yeah. Okay. Wonder if we shouldn't just cut this one with the pneumatic quickly first.
Yeah.
Do that. Okay. Hooking up somewhere. Okay. Rinse. Trim it by my hand. That just the little piece that curls up gets in your way every now and then. Okay, that clean up. Cool. Looks like cleaned up over the whole edge. So now we know we are pretty flat. Get some kickers. Alright, so we just quickly popped a little hole in there so we can get a clamp in here just to hold this in place. And as you can see, our fitment is pretty minty. So next step will be just taking everything apart, wiping it down, making sure it's as clean as can be. We'll wipe down some rods as well. And then we'll go ahead and start tacking it, put it all back together and tack it. Now that we've got our panels clean and back on the back, just a couple things to mention before we start. One thing is that when you're tacking, you don't want to start tacking at both ends and work your way towards the center. You're going to end up with one panel that's essentially a little bit higher than the other. Your lengths might not be exactly right over the distance. So best practice is usually to start in the middle and then work your way outwards to both sides. Or you can also just start at either end and work your way across. And that's totally fine. Alright, then we'll wipe down our rods as well before we start. And then make sure your tungsten's sharp and clean. Everything, cleanliness is next to godliness, I believe they say. Then I'll tack it on the back. We'll pull it off. We'll tap any tacks that have pulled, two different layers slightly. We'll tap those back to flat, and then we'll go ahead and grind the tacks as flat as can be, or as close to our material as possible, and then one long weld off the back. Actually, we'll probably do little sections, jump around, just makes life a little bit easier. But you can also do one long weld if you're a nice consistent welder. And then and your panels should be good, and we can go on from there. Alright, so now that we've got all the tacks done and ground down, next up I'm just going to run it through the wheel quickly on just a very light pressure, just to make sure, you know, it's all nice and level throughout the weld, or throughout the length of the weld, and then we're going to hit it with the welder. Should be good. Be enough. Yeah, you don't want to go too much because then you're going to stretch the tacks, but that just knocked it all nice and level. Now it's ready for welding. Sweet. Yeah. Alright, so we're just going to go ahead and weld it on the buck. I know we said we wouldn't, but I've got this little piece of wood underneath here just to keep it off the buck. So we've got a bit of space and a bit of room to work with. But this is pretty much purely out of convenience. The welder and everything's already set up here. Okay guys, we are all done with this weld and it looks great. If you ask me, we've turned 2 into 1 today. Now, next up we've got to turn another 20 more into the same one and we'll be done with the bonnet. But I'll continue with that off camera guys. But if you want to get some more regular updates, you can follow us on Instagram. But until then, I'll see you guys on the next one. Cheers. Don't forget to like and subscribe.